Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Catholic Talk Show. Today, we're going to be talking about what the Catholic Church teaches about divorce and annulments.
That's right. We're going to look at the words of Jesus on divorce. We're going to look at all the grounds for annulments in the Catholic Church. We're going to look at divorce rates in the U.S. population, and we're going to look at the Petrine and the Pauline privileges.
So if you've always wondered what the church actually teaches about divorce and annulments, well, let's stick together and find out.
All right, let's dig in here. Thanks for being back on another episode of the Catholic Talk Show. Good to see you guys.
It's always good to see you guys.
I'm glad that we've stuck together for the kids.
I know.
Yeah.
We care about you. I mean, what more can we say?
It's for the kids.
It's for the kids.
Do it for the kids.
If it weren't for the kids, I would have left you guys a long time ago.
That's right.
But all of you, our children who enjoy our show, we're staying together. And that's what we're talking about today is
Just for you.
divorce and annulments.
Mm-hmm.
People who don't stay together.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a very serious issue, though, facing our society and our culture. And it's one that I think in the face of a lot of the, culture wars that are going on right now between same-sex marriage and abortion and politics, that the fundamental and grave issue of marriage between Catholic people does not get enough discussion because it really is probably more of a detriment to the body of Christ than just about any other issue going on right now, including those ones that maybe get more high-profile news.
And compared to 100 years ago, I mean, the divorce rates in the Catholic Church are through the roof. When you think of a World War II generation or World War I generation Catholicism, you know, they stuck through everything together. And most definitely, you know, we could look at culturally what gave rise to, divorce and what contributes to it. That's how I always prepare my couples. I always express to them the three leading causes of divorce being finance, sex, and religion. And religion thrown in there is an important point because, you know, a lot of times religion is the one thing that a lot of couples avoid even discussing before entering into the state of marriage because it's just not important to them in their early 20s. But down the road, when they start having kids and they want to start raising the kids Catholic, it can become a crossroads of one party not showing up to the Sunday Mass.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and let's talk about that state, right? Like, what is the state of marriage when two people...
Connecticut is for lovers. Oh, no, that's Virginia.
Connect.
I cut. That's right. I live on a street that has Connecticut in the name, and I have to, every time write it out, I go, connect, I cut. Otherwise, I'd misspell it.
Connect, I cut. Okay.
Same thing like Wednesday. You have to say Wednesday. February.
February.
Anyway, divorce and annulments.
Yeah. I mean, what you're divorcing, what you're annulling, what is the state, right? So it's kind of like we should probably like look at what happens to a couple when they get married and in the Catholic Church, what makes it a Catholic marriage and what makes a different union?
Well, I mean, in the Catholic Church, marriage is one of the sacraments. This is not like how general society views marriage as a temporary thing. This is a vow. This is a sacrament of the church that you're making before God. And in the church, in the Catholic Church, the sacrament of marriage is the only sacrament that people affect on each other. The priest does not perform the sacrament of marriage. He witnesses it.
Mm-hmm.
You are performing the sacrament of marriage on your spouse. So it's a really unique sacrament in that respect, in that it is the only sacrament that we have a very unique participation in, both in its affect, but also in how we live it out.
Mm-hmm.
That is, for married people, a sacrament that happens every day.
Mm-hmm. And for a priest, as a witness of that marriage, you know, I sign my name down on the documentation, yes, to make it legal civilly, but I'm stating as a priest that this is something that God is joining together. That's why I really love to spend time in prep with the couples, going over a lot of different materials to discern, is God truly calling you together, and is God the author of this beautiful bond, that we will, that ultimately you will, confess with a living faith your undying love for this person. So it's important to realize, granted, so many people that I grew up with went through divorce, divorced families. I come from a divorced family. There's grounds for annulment. There's grounds for and reasons why people separate.
What's the difference between an annulment and a divorce?
I think that's the fundamental question that
would be
most people don't understand. But to get into that, I think first we have to understand what a marriage is.
Yeah. And if you're to find out what a marriage is, it means there's a commitment between two parties, right?
With free
Our
will.
commitment to you, your commitment to us, is to go to the Catholic Talk Show website at catholictalkshow.com. Check us out on all of our platforms. And most certainly, we give you thanks for contributing, especially to our Patreon family members that support the show and help us to continue to reach new markets. We do that because of your generosity. So we thank you so much for being patrons. And for our new patrons out there that are interested in giving, please go to patreon.com/Catholic Talk Show, and you could support us there. And thank you so much for being in a great bonded relationship with us.
Yeah, say I do to becoming a patron.
That's a good way to put it.
That's what you should have said.
I know. That I lean into you every now and then. Whiff, big whiff. So
a marriage, as defined by the Catechism of the Church, it's a matrimonial covenant by which a man and a woman establish between themselves a partnership of the whole life, is by its nature ordered towards the good of the spouses and the procreation and education of offspring. This covenant is between baptized persons and has been raised by Christ the Lord to the dignity of a sacrament. Now, some things in there that really point out what marriage really is that it's a covenant between baptized persons, right? So you asked, well, what's the difference between a divorce and an annulment? Baptismal state has a lot to do with that, with differentiating divorces, annulments. But a divorce and annulment, so a lot of people think of an annulment as a Catholic divorce, and that is not at all what an annulment is. A divorce, there is no divorce in the Catholic Church. You cannot get divorced because we go by the words of Jesus himself. In Matthew 5, he said, "But I say to you, whoever divorces his wife, unless the marriage is unlawful, causes her to commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery." There is no divorce. And he talks about how in the Old Covenant, men were able to divorce their wives. And he says that Moses allowed you to do this out of the hardness of your heart. But Jesus, in his authority, abrogates those concessions towards the hardness of people. In the New Covenant, those are not valid anymore, commanded by Jesus himself. So no Catholic person can legitimately get a divorce.
So, and what an annulment is just rendering the fact that what was once held to be valid, it's essentially nullifying that there was no grounds for true love and that you were meeting the conditions for marriage. So
an annulment.
The conditions are like, you have to have a free will, right? Like you have to be acting.
So the conditions for it to be valid are the spouses are free to marry so that they aren't in a previous bond. They are capable of giving their consent to marry. They freely exchange their consent, and in consenting to marry, they have the intention to marry for life, to be faithful to one another, and to be open to children. They intend the good of each other, and their consent is given in the presence of two witnesses before a properly authorized church minister.
See, and I think one thing to understand about annulments is it's not something that the church grants necessarily. It's something that the church certifies and recognizes. An annulment really is the recognition done by a proper ecclesial research and canon law that a valid marriage was never contracted. That's the difference. So
and that's why you have tribunals out there.
Yeah.
And there's an evaluation process between the person who is presenting the case and seeking the annulment, and going back and forth between the parties and really discovering what was missing.
That's a tough thing to go through. I've known a few people in that process, and it's very difficult.
Yeah, and I think, with recent encouragement from Pope Francis and efforts done by judicial vicars around the country as well as the bishops, I think that we're taking steps in the right direction. And what I share with people, I just walked with a couple most recently, and it tests the patience with the process, and it could be challenging where very impatiently we try to rush toward what we want. But at the same time, if we go through the process, it can actually be a very healing process,
Really?
and it can enrich the relationship of these people with God, two with the church, and then hopefully prepare them for entering into a state of marriage that is valid.
And one of the things, so there's a lot to annulments, right? And we'll unpack those throughout the course of this episode. But understanding the difference between divorce and annulments is very fundamental, right? The church, in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, number 2382, between the baptized, a ratified and consummated marriage cannot be dissolved by any human power for any reason other than death. Death is the only thing that can grant the dissolution of a marriage.
Death.
That's it. Till death do us part. That actually used to mean something. And there's a lot of nuance with divorce and annulment, so we'll get into that. But I think the thing that we really need to address is the societal impact of what divorce is having on individuals, on children. There's just generations of children being raised without a mother and a father, and it's causing so much brokenness and so much hurt in this world that it can't be overstated, the impact that's having on our society. And if you look at the societal decline that we've experienced in the last 50 years, I mean, it is tracking very much alongside divorce rates.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And, it's the children, a lot of them psychologically think it's their fault or that they did something wrong because they look at that union of a father and a mother and they look at the love that's supposed to be between it and reflecting back upon them as a nurturing, sign of God, and so when you fracture that, a lot of kids just feel like,
it breaks them.
Yeah, it just breaks them.
A child should have their mother and their father. They should be excited for Christmas morning and have mom and dad both there. They should be excited to have mom and dad both there for their birthday parties or to take them their first day of school or to have dinner with them at nights. That is the good of the child necessitates that.
A wholesome environment that is powerfully nurturing, both from the masculine sense in the father and the feminine sense in the mother. And it gives that environment of nurturing by way of the affection that comes uniquely, but collectively as marriage to the fruits of marriage.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the family is the domestic church. Mm-hmm. And when the mother and father divorce, that's a schism in the domestic church. And that bears terrible fruit in children. I mean, my heart breaks for all the children out there. I know you are a child of a divorced family. I mean, what kind of impact did that have on you?
Well, I mean, it certainly, has an impact because of, just different desires that you have to be close to your father. If your father and your mother divorce and you're living with your mother, for me, I had the great example in my grandparents who, really put in a ton of time. And, my early years all the way up to like my early teens, they were there every single day. And even when I went through high school, I mean, they were still super supportive. So that was helpful. But at the same time, there's a vacuum in it all, you know? So, like you're searching for the constancy of fatherhood.
Right. I mean, it's the divine plan. It is the way that God created us, is to have a mother and a father and a family. And it's something fundamentally lacking when that's not available. And I know that your grandparents had a great deal in effect in raising you, but our generation is the last generation that have grandparents that aren't divorced. I mean, the next generations, Gen Z, and their grandparents are probably going to be divorced. By statistically, their grandparents will be divorced. They're not going to have the safety net that our generation had, that sure, parents are divorcing, but they at least have stable grandparents to save the day.
Yeah. I mean, it's the problem's like, I think, I'm a divorcee, right? I guess it was considered a defective form of marriage. So I got into the seminary. I had to go through the tribunal. That's the output was this defective form of marriage. So
it was a lack of form.
It was a lack of form, right? So that was just because we got married in like a Baptist church, which eventually burned down.
Did it really? After?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It was right after the divorce. But, and I got married for
Was
all
it the
the wrong
ex-wife?
reasons.
Was it the ex-wife?
Possibly. No, I mean, it's like you go into this relationship and really had the wrong idea about what a marriage was. And this was before my conversion, until, I encountered Jesus and then decided to follow him in the best way I knew. And I look at the difference between my previous marriage and then the marriage that I have now, where, she and I discern marriage together, in prayer. And, of course, we had a, love for each other, affection for each other. But at the end of the day, it's like, I don't want to marry anybody that God doesn't want me to marry, because that's kind of bringing him into it. And, that's, I see the difference between it. And I think that's what a lot of people do is they get married for the wrong reasons. Thank God the Catholic priest said, no, I'm not going to marry you guys. Thank God he said that. I'll be forever grateful.
The Catholic priest would not marry you.
He would not marry me.
I don't think I've ever heard that story.
It was the guy at Resurrection who lost his wife and then became a priest.
Father. Oh man, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, he was just like, I was like, yeah, I'm Catholic, And he's like, you going to mass? I'm like, no, not quite. And he just looked at me. He's like, I'm not marrying you guys. That's all he said. He's like, I'm not doing it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Good for him.
And he said, don't go to another Catholic church either. He says, you're living in sin, and I was like, whatever.
Wow. So those would be grounds for an invalid marriage.
Right.
Or a marriage that the church would not have recognized as having actually been contracted.
Right. My previous marriage is not considered
it's not a marriage.
Form for marriage.
Really, I mean, you weren't married, though.
I was playing dress up.
You weren't married.
Right.
I mean, civilly or in your mind, you may have been married, but according to God, you weren't.
Yep.
So that's the distinction that I think people miss with divorce and annulments is that you weren't married if you've gotten an annulment.
Right.
And marriage's sacrament requires both willing and active participation in respect to both parties.
Which is what Jen and I did.
Exactly. So you're living out your sacrament.
Yeah.
So there is, in the canon law, there are grounds listed for a marriage annulment, right? And they're pretty well defined. So some of them are the insufficient use of reason, that you and your spouse did not know what was happening during the marriage ceremony because mental illness, lack of consciousness, drug abuse. Like, so people go to Vegas and get drunk and get married. That would be a grounds for annulment for the insufficient use of reason. You have the grave lack of discretionary judgment concerning essential matrimonial rights and duties. So you or your spouse were affected by some serious circumstances or factors that made you unable to judge or evaluate the decision to marry, right?
Yep.
That sounds kind of, right? You have a incapacity to assume marital obligations because of serious psychological disorder. So if you are psychological or have some psychological issue.
I wonder what that means for like people who are battling with depression. Like, really.
Well, that's one of the things that a lot of the cases of annulment are getting a lot more wide open. And I think pretty famously, the Pope said something to the effect, and I want to get it right. I'll get the number somewhere later in the episode, that most marriages are not actually validly contracted because there's so much baggage in the world that the depression or lack of understanding of what they're actually getting into. Now, I think that is a bit, and don't take this use of this word wrong, but I think that's too liberal of a reading. I don't think the Pope is binding me to that statement, but I think that's a wrong statement. I don't think most marriages are invalid, but I get the point he was trying to make.
Yeah.
And it's a pastoral point, and that's what we have to keep in mind too, especially when Pope Francis is sharing. I mean, he shares very pastorally in relationship to the people that he served, and he continues to serve, and having that pastoral sensitivity is ultimately the most important thing that I try to employ in my priesthood, is just meeting people where they are And I can't tell you how many couples that I've met that, you know, they have every grounds for divorce. And it comes down to the question is, do you want to work on this relationship or not?
Right. Do you want to bring this faith into this relationship?
Because for a lot of these people, they didn't have faith when they got married.
Right.
They didn't love Jesus. They didn't, you know, that's so common. Yeah. They went because their parents were pressing them to do that.
Or they wanted to.
Or they wanted whatever, you know, and that's what they've always dreamed. They went to a Catholic, you know, they were a flower girl or whatever, and that's what they've always wanted. Whatever it may be, the maturity level of somebody in their, you know, mid-20s or early 20s, and, you know, it's like there's a desperation there. I want to be with somebody. I don't want to be alone. And I'm willing to look past certain things just to be able to have it.
Yeah.
And I see that. I see that in a number of people.
I've seen that in some really people close to me where they were heading towards the altar to get married. And the guy was like, I don't think I should get married. I don't think this is right. And he's like, but I'm going to probably go through with it because this will break her heart because she wants to get married. And I said, dude,
wrong idea.
That's the wrong idea. If she's so hell bent on being married, I guarantee that if you do the right thing here and don't marry her in the church, when you don't have the intention of staying with her, she'll be married again within a year, or she'll get married within a year. And sure enough, within like a year, that girl was married. And now this guy went on to have kids, and he dodged that bullet there because he had the actual proper discernment. But speaking to that, Canon 1095:30, Section 1, 1096, the ignorance about the nature of marriage. And I think this is what Pope Francis was talking about, that most marriages today could be ruled invalid, that you or your spouse did not know that marriage is a permanent relationship between a man and a woman ordered towards procreation of offspring by means of some sexual cooperation. Most marriages today probably could be invalidated by that because they don't have the full understanding of what marriage is. So that's the grounds that a lot of people are going for annulments now. And there's a lot of other reasons: fraud, willful exclusion of children. You know, one of the spouses said, I don't want children. You can get an annulment for that. Willful exclusion of marital fidelity. So you had no intention of being monogamous and being faithful to your marriage vows. You know, willful exclusion of marital permanence. You wanted to get married, but you had no intention of being married forever. So there's a lot of reason. Force, you can't be forced into a marriage. So shotgun marriages are not valid. Those are grounds for annulments, right? Or fear. You married someone because you were afraid that if you didn't, you would be physically abused. Things like that don't allow for a marriage to be properly contracted. So those are all in the canon law. You can find those, and I could put the link to that. But those are reasons that annulments happen. Now, what happens when a person wants to get recognition from the church of annulment? They go before a tribunal, and then the tribunal will...
Well, in essence, you meet with your pastor, your associate priest, or there's a number of task forces there too in different parishes where a number of the laity who have either gone through the annulment process to try to give you a sense of support. So if you are going through the process of divorce and seeking annulment in the church, then, you know, what I always recommend is before you even sign the papers and get divorced, come see the priest. If you go through your marriage preparation in the church and you meet with the priest a number of times, you should probably meet with the priest before you process a divorce. So that's first and foremost, to get the support there before you take those steps and to help you. You know, I know a family that went through divorce and then got remarried again, divorced and remarried again. And the kids are always on a roller coaster, you know, and that's not healthy. You know, but anyway, you start there at the parish level, you fill out information, we send that to the tribunal for review, and then the tribunal will begin the investigation and the conversations between parties. And then ultimately it will be sent back in the affirmative or not, you know, to move forward. I just got an affirmative letter just the other day, and you know, was able to bless this couple that have, you know, striven to do what's right in relationship to the church.
Now, when you say affirmative, that means that the church or the tribunal has
the church
found
affirms that there is, the nullity
of that
factor
yes,
of that
okay.
relationship. So,
Okay.
Yeah, there's I've got the blessing of knowing two guys who are in annulments or trying to get annulments. In both scenarios, the wife left, and it was just like that's it. And one of them, didn't get it, and he was pretty upset, because he's like, look at me, I've got, I can't date anybody or whatever, and then
Well, you can date somebody, you just can't get married, and you have to remain chaste.
right. And then the other guy was, he's like, I know I can't get an annulment, and my wife is in sin right now, and I'm praying for her. And he waited almost 20 years for her.
Wow.
And she eventually came back.
Really?
Yeah. It
That's
was a
powerful.
beautiful story, a really beautiful story of, because it's like, it's not what we want. If it's the annulment's not there, it's not necessarily what people are looking for.
Mm-hmm.
And because of it, you have a lot of people who just rebel and say, this is just dumb.
Yep.
So,
My hands
for
down.
example, some of the terminology in the obviously keeping the people's names from this.
That's
but
good.
Yeah, the tribunal of the Diocese of St. Augustine rendered an affirmative decision on the petition for the declaration of nullity in the above named and numbered marriage nullity case. So that's the canonical terminology.
So they
that's
got an
associated
annulment.
with. So they essentially got the annulment, which would then open them up for a bond or a new bond.
Is there some responsibility that's kind of been overlooked of people who are priests and who are preparing these people for marriage? I mean, is there, like the guy that I went to, if he was just like Mr. Happy Priest, like, yeah, sure, I'll marry you. Like, is there some training that you guys went through or where?
Well, absolutely. I mean, there's marriage preparation and pre-cana and all that.
It's very, very detailed. So
I mean, how much of a portion of your activity as a priest is towards preparation of marriage? I mean, it's a substantial part.
It's a substantial amount. And granted, it ebbs and flows, but I've got easily seven files and a few messages already preparing me for 2020, requesting that I would prepare a couple. I take it extremely seriously.
Yeah,
and if there's a couple that needs more time, they get more time. Now, granted, there may be priests out there that don't take that type of proactive stance, but you can't get around the prenuptial questionnaire. You can't get around going through the impediments of marriage. So you have to go through each and every single impediment and ask the question, are you related by blood? Are you forcing this person into marriage? You go through all of these different steps. And then on top of that, you go through the focus inventory where you're inventorying this relationship and you're looking at their social dynamics and, you're really inquisiting in the sense of questioning and really trying to come to the truth of what is this relationship and how I can meet you where you are and walk with you and continue to cultivate the sense of relationship with the church and what the sacrament is in relationship to marriage.
So there's a couple other things that I think we should talk about that a lot of people get wrong about marriage. Number one is that Catholics can't get separated. If there's a situation where one of the spouses is at physical danger or grave psychological danger, or the children, separation can be a valid approach. In the Catechism, it says the separation of spouses while maintaining a marriage bond can be legitimate in certain cases provided for by canon law. It also says that if a civil divorce remains the only possible way of ensuring certain legal rights, such as the care of children or the protection of inheritance, it can be tolerated and does not constitute a moral offense, which I'd actually have never heard that. I've never read that in the Catechism.
That's interesting.
That a civil divorce, even though it's still maintaining the marital bonds, is something that the church can allow strategically if it provides for children being...
if there's a greater good.
Well, maybe if you have a marriage with between a Catholic and a non-Catholic, and the only way that the one of the spouses can raise the children Catholic is through a civil divorce, well, then the church would likely then in that situation say that is a illicit thing to do. Another thing that a lot of people get confusion around is the reception of the sacraments for divorced people. That's a very
communion.
Yeah, who can receive communion if I'm divorced, if I'm separated, if I'm remarried? Who can receive communion? I think that's a really that's a thing that there's not enough clarity on. Do you want to offer any clarity?
I know a woman, God bless her, man, for years. She stayed committed to her husband, even though her husband left her. And she remained steadfast. She never went into another relationship, went to daily mass, never received the Eucharist because she was under the impression that she was not allowed to receive communion because of the quote unquote, she was filed. So there was a civil divorce. But she still maintained her commitment before God and the altar.
Yeah. So she could have been receiving.
She could have been receiving for years. And that you know, I literally cried when I distributed Holy Communion to her for the first time, and she was overwhelmed and wept. This was at a mission that I preached.
Oh, I can only imagine the tears.
Oh, I needed 2 hankies.
2 hankies.
2 hankies.
I got
Well,
a box
I
of
only hope
hankies.
the angels administered to her, you know, throughout that ordeal.
It was gorgeous.
Yeah.
It was absolutely gorgeous. So that's why
so if
having the conversation with your priest, having the conversation with your pastoral ministers, your deacons at your parish, to have these conversations, because
tell them your situation.
We need to know your situation, and we need to be able to help you, you know? And that's what we're there for. And it may take a little bit of time, but in the big picture of things, you know, it's worth it.
So a spouse who is divorced, who is not remarried and remain chaste, can continue to receive the Eucharist.
Yes.
A Catholic who is in a validly contracted marriage, who gets a divorce, a civil divorce, and remarried, cannot receive communion. And I know that there's certain places and certain things, Germany, that want to change that, but that's not okay. And I think if that ever really gets pushed through in the church, that could be grounds for a schism, because that's people want to push forward for that because it would solve so many pastoral issues and make priests' jobs easier. But it's no bueno. That's not okay.
What's different? I guess the vow of a professed vow of like a religious sister, or even the vow that you make. You know, you see priests leave the priesthood and nuns or whatever leave the convent. You know, what's different about their vow? I mean, obviously they're marrying God or the church, but what's different about their vow to where that's so easily?
It's not easy.
Okay.
I mean,
but it's also the nature of the sacrament that they received. Whether it's a vow, not sacramental, or ordination, the nature of that ordination is not the same as the ordination of marriage.
Yeah. And if you look at the prenuptial questionnaire prior to you entering into nuptials, there is a question that clearly identifies: have you made a perpetual vow in a public, you know, in a religious institution? Have you ever been ordained a priest or a bishop?
Yeah.
Have you ever? So you're going through all of these various impediments, because ultimately you have to go through the process of laicization if you are going to do it right. And the church doesn't want to speed up that process. No, like if you're struggling in your vocation of priesthood.
There's some good men who were priests who discerned after a long time of priesthood that it'd be better for them to be laicized and then to enter into a marriage. And there's some good priests, and there's also some priests who don't go about it the right way. But that happens.
It happens. And it's life, it's humanity. And there's always a road for everybody. And that's the thing. That's why the conversation
Not
must
you,
be
Richie.
there.
No one wants you. Only Jesus.
That's true. That's why I'm a
Only
priest,
Jesus
bro.
wants you.
And thank God for that. Thank God for that. But, you know, there's always a path for each one of us. And that's the beauty of it. And that's why having the conversation is so essential, and to walk slowly. You know, to walk slowly is something that, you know, the church, the Catholic Church, is going to have expectations for your preparation for marriage. But, you know, that should enrich the overall process of your prep, as well as enrich your whole marriage, because you aren't going to be entering into it ignorantly. You're going to be entering into it with a certain sense of, this is a commitment for my life.
So one of the biggest factors in divorce now, 41% of all first marriages fail. 41%. That's crazy. You weren't in a marriage.
I wasn't married.
You weren't married.
Thank you.
You gotta quit beating yourself up on that. 50% of all marriages fail. 50% of all marriages fail, but 41% of first marriages, 60% of second marriages, and 73% of all third marriages fail.
Wow.
73% of the third
Yeah,
time.
but by the
Come
third
on, man.
time, yeah.
Yeah, but those aren't marriages. A lot of those aren't marriages, right? They're
civil
they're
marriages.
like the one that I was in.
I know.
So they're not technically marriages.
I know a guy who was married 5 times, and he was married to the same woman. He calls her 35 or 24 because he was married to her 2 and 4. He had a first marriage.
Oh my gosh.
Married one woman, divorced her, got married again, remarried number 2, divorced her again. Now he's on like 5 or 6, right? But when you get into that habit, marriage becomes cheap to you. Marriage just becomes dating. It's not really.
It's weird.
Yeah.
I don't even know what marriage is in that perspective.
It's nothing.
Well, it's like a society. I think part of it for me, it was like it's kind of societal.
Yeah.
And then, it's like, oh, we're in love or whatever. And it's just all great. And you're like, well, that's just got to be the next step.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's me telling you I love you more.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's one. No, you hang up first. No, you hang up first.
Yeah.
So-
I've never done that before.
So
I can hear you breathing.
the 5 professions with the highest divorce rates are dancers, which I can only assume what kind of dancers. I'm figuring not.
I'm guessing, yeah.
I'm figuring it's
Talking
not,
like line dancers at the local.
There
sure.
may or may not be poles involved.
right. Polish people have what?
Yes.
Oh,
Poles.
the
polka.
The Poles.
Yeah. Bartenders. 43% of dancers, their marriages end in divorce. Bartenders, 38.4%. Massage therapists, 38%. Gaming cage workers. I don't even know what that is. Probably casinos.
No, game, right?
Gaming cage
Oh,
workers.
maybe. Oh, no.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that
Yeah,
is
casino
casinos.
workers.
Yeah.
But those are the people that are in the behind the cage.
Yeah, and then gaming service workers, so probably
Yeah.
the other people.
Yeah. It's the whole casino environment.
Now, the 5 professions with the lowest divorce rate.
Yeah, but you didn't even talk about active duty military.
Oh gosh.
That's not on here.
Oh, that's like it's rampant.
bro.
it's
like
probably right
the
below
SEALs?
that. It's probably right below
No, like the SEALs
up there.
active duty
Yeah.
is like 85%.
that. Really?
Active duty SEALs.
Oh, it's so high in the military. It's
yeah.
it's astronomical. Yeah.
But that's why I love working with
A
military.
lot of them get benefits and stuff like that too, and so a lot of it's driven by
And a lot of separation, a lot of
separation. I mean, a lot of it's just genuine like struggle with being
The life.
separated.
yeah.
Yeah.
The professions with the lowest divorce rates: farmers, podiatrists. I guess
foot doctor.
Ooh.
I don't know why. Clergy.
Hey.
Yeah, you ain't getting
Not
no
you, though.
divorce.
We're talking about Father Justin, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Optometrists and agricultural engineers.
That's weird.
Mm.
I was thinking talk show host, but whatever.
Well, Catholic talk show hosts, right?
Yeah.
You're really lowering our average right
Yeah.
now. I've been married for 17 years.
Yeah. Wow.
Hi, Kelly.
17 years.
Yeah,
Amazing.
I'm not even 40 yet, and I've already been married for 17 years. But you're lowering the average to 50% of all Catholic talk. Well, no, it'd be
Yeah.
1/3 of all Catholic talk show marriages end in divorce
No,
because of you.
it wasn't a marriage.
It wasn't a marriage.
It wasn't
now
a
you're
marriage.
Over
now you're
100%.
defeated.
And the
There
thing
you go.
is, and the thing
We're back
is,
to 100%.
and the thing is like I guarantee you, the marriages in the Catholic Church that are not that dissolve or go into divorce, to quote marriages, I guarantee there's a defective. There's just something wrong with them entering into it that was not uncovered in this process.
A lot of those divorces probably would be annulled.
That's what I'm
They
thinking.
probably would have.
That's
and,
what I'm
and I
thinking.
think that's what Francis was saying in that comment earlier, which I disagree with. Sorry, Holy Father. But I think that what he's saying is that a lot of people are unnecessarily removed from the church because they had had a divorce.
Yep.
And that if they would just talk to their priests and to
Yep.
the tribunals, that a lot of them would see that their initial marriages, because they were so improperly formed and catechized, were not validly contracted marriages. And they probably could become married in the church and get their marriage recognized and come back to the church.
Yeah, and you think about like maybe somebody with Down syndrome or something like that, or somebody who has some sort of impairment physically, like where the church, lands on that. I mean,
Well, then
If there's an
have-
impairment, or if there's, like if there's impotence, for example, like those are clear grounds for nullity.
Yeah. I mean, if you can't consummate the marriage,
It has
Okay.
never been consummated.
yeah.
gotcha.
Mhm.
Okay.
there's two other things that are, I guess, grounds for annulment. There's the Petrine privilege and the Pauline privilege. Now, these are always been a little bit hard to, I guess, explain for me or to understand. Do you have any grasp of them?
Well,
because I have a handy little chart.
Well, good. Let's go to the
This
chart.
should make it easier for
Features
us.
and benefits of
the Petrine as opposed to the Pauline.
So
and one, I mean, it's in relationship to people who converted to the faith. That's
basically what both of them are.
It's like a like some sort of if this, then
this,
that,
right.
and then this.
And you have to consider, especially when this was being applied pastorally, how many people were converting to Catholicism, how many people were converting to Christianity.
It's still happening now.
And it's still happening now. But like, and I mean, we're talking about like staunch pagans or staunch, other types of practices or no faith whatsoever.
Yeah, I think the paganism one that you're talking to is definitely the Pauline privilege.
Yes.
So the Pauline privilege would be an unbaptized person marries another person who's also unbaptized. The non-baptized of both can be proven. The marriage ends in a civil divorce. The unbaptized person desiring a Catholic marriage wants to be baptized as a Catholic. The privilege takes place at the time of the new marriage. So because they were both unbaptized, but they were civilly divorced, but he wants to now enter the church and marry a Catholic, he can be baptized. And because of that baptism, he can then enter into a marriage validly.
And, I was trying to work a Pauline privilege a while back, and it's challenging to identify proof that the person was not baptized. And granted, you can get testimonies from the parents or whatever, but it's challenging. Like, I can prove I was baptized even if I don't have the certificate, the church burnt down, or any of those other circumstances, because say I have a picture,
Of you not being baptized?
No, of being baptized. Like, it's easier to prove that.
Here's
like
the water's bouncing off his forehead.
Here's me next to it. My brother-in-law and my sister and my brother-in-law got an annulment. And my brother-in-law actually qualified for the Pauline privilege. And he had to have it sent to Rome, and it was sent back and confirmed. And he's never remarried. My sister's remarried, but they can both validly receive. I was actually his... After their divorce, I was actually his RCIA sponsor.
Oh, wow.
And kind of, he's like, after the divorce, he's having a hard time. And my sister and him still get along great. But that was an interesting process.
Yeah.
Now, so that's the Pauline privilege. Now, the Petrine privilege, it's called Pauline because it's in reference to 1 Corinthians and Paul making an exception where he says, I, Paul, say, and he's basically making an accommodation for pagans who the former pagan spouse wouldn't go along for the trip. Now, the Petrine privilege is not based on St. Peter, but is based on the chair of St. Peter, on the Pope. And a baptized Christian marries an unbaptized person. The non-baptism of the one spouse can be proven. The marriage ends in divorce. In that case, the baptized person can petition the Pope, and the Pope can personally set aside that marriage. That's the Petrine privilege. So those are both kind of the... Those are the advanced trigonometry of annulments, right?
Trigonometry.
Trigonometry in the tribunal.
That's it. Trigonometry in the tribunals.
Trigonometry.
So a couple factors that lead to divorce. I think one of the biggest factors that you'll see, and I think over 75% of all divorces cite this as a factor, is pornography. And for our listeners, if your marriage is struggling with pornography or you are struggling with pornography and it's affecting your marriage, there's one of our sponsors, Covenant Eyes. They have a really excellent program that helps people overcome pornography. Or if you don't have a pornography problem, it helps you never develop one in the first place. And it's an app that allows for the accountability of a person to avoid the temptation of pornography, which is destroying marriages, destroying people's libidos, destroying people's self-worth and their image of God. So if you go to covenanteyes.com covenanteyes.com and you use the promo code Talk Show, you get 30 days free of Covenant Eyes.
Talk, right?
Catholic Talk.
Yeah.
Catholic Talk.
Use the promo code Catholic
Talk. So covenanteyes.com, use the promo code Catholic Talk and get 30 days free of Covenant Eyes.
Yep.
Right.
And another option too, I mean, Exodus 90 is a fantastic program for men.
That is.
And one of the stipulations is that you would not use internet or your computer, tablet, phone for any other use but for business, and among other types of austere practices. And it renews your masculinity and gets you going and revs those engines. So that plus covenantize is a wonderful way. And both of them are based in accountability. So check out Exodus 90 for sure.
Our sponsors are out there.
We've got some pretty awesome sponsors.
I wouldn't take any other sponsors, any old sponsors. I mean, they're people that are actually, those are groups that are actually in line with what we're trying to do, which is to educate people and through practical knowledge and application, make better Christians and better marriages and better lives.
And the hope is that it's supporting, you know,
That's
like
right.
I know when I'm here with you guys, it's a huge support. I mean, our conversation last night, you know, was just so supportive to me and my priesthood and my journey. And I hope that I'm providing that same sense of support to you guys as married men. And it's always a joy to come out here and shoot these shows and, you know, to know that we're, you know, receiving your support and prayer as well. And that this is providing you a supportive, you know, and nurturing platform. Like that's just, it's wonderful.
So before we get going, I've got an inquisition for you.
Oh no. I say null and void.
Null and void?
Yes.
He's the tribunal.
You don't get to make that. You do not get to make that assessment yet. Okay, this is a pretty easy one, but I think it's just understanding how different scenarios work out. Can a man marry? Can a man All right,
love a woman?
Stay focused. You're trying to sing your tap dance your way out of this. It's not going to work. It won't work.
You're shucking and jiving, boy.
Yes. Can a man marry his widow's sister?
And his man.
Can a man marry his widow's sister?
Now is he of the same blood, or is it like a half?
No.
Is
No,
it
it's
like
it's his widow's sister?
different.
It's his widow's sister. It's not.
Yeah, not this is an incest thing here.
his sister's widow?
No. You caught it. All right, you got it.
You like presenting these things to me.
I do.
I caught
So
you this
obviously,
time. Though.
what's the answer?
Absolutely not.
Thank you. And why not? For anyone who hasn't caught on yet?
Because
She's not alive.
No. A man cannot marry his widow's
sister.
because that would mean
It's-
he made the widow. It means he's dead. So he can't marry the widow's sister because he's dead.
It's another paradox. It's another
It's not a
paradox
paradox,
in
it's
the
just a-
mind of Shield.
Yeah.
You just present these obscure things.
Yo.
That was good. Good job
Hey,
recognizing
dude.
that.
Hey, man.
He just went through his checklist in his head. He's like, marriage, pre-Cana,
Tribunal.
just mailing this one in. Aha.
Ah.
Good job. I'm impressed.
Thank you, my friend. And thank you guys for journeying with us again. CatholicTalkShow.com. Follow us on Facebook and also Instagram as well as Twitter. And we'll see you guys next week. God bless. Stick together.